Good evening. It's my pleasure to call the November 21st, 2022 Curriculum and Pupil Services Committee meeting of the School District of Haverford Township to order. We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And are you going to walk us through tonight's agenda? We have 3 items on tonight's agenda, and I'll turn it over to the administration to walk us through them.
Great. Thank you so much, Ms. Wiedemann. We are going to have 3 items this evening. First, Mr. Anderson will take us through some information about PowerSchool and how that is hosted and propose a change to the way that it is hosted. Secondly, Mr. Donaghy and our high school administrators and some of our curriculum supervisors will present the 23-24 high school course selection guide. Hard to imagine, but that's right there at the knocking on our door. And then finally this evening, Christina Carter will lead us through a conversation about our assessment data that comes from last year, the 21-22 assessments. So we will begin with Mr. Anderson, if you don't mind taking the podium.
Good evening. The proposal that's in the agenda is for, currently we host PowerSchool, which is our student information system, is hosted in the district. We're going to look to move that to being hosted by PowerSchool so that they run it in their data center. Are responsible for backup, security, upgrades, and all of the work associated with that. We currently have multiple PowerSchool products that they still host for us. The only one we have been hosting in the district right now is the student information system. So we'll just be putting everything together in their data center run by their team.
And the proposal for this, you can see, is attached to the agenda, and we will, at the next board meeting, which is December 1st, at the business meeting, this will be on the agenda for approval.
Any questions? I'm looking at Larry because he knows computer things.
These days, it's great to be able to have somebody else take care of all that stuff.
Yep.
24/7, you don't have to worry about it.
Nope. Their responsibility, exactly.
Yeah, I was just going to ask just a little more of the context for the why. Is it that they have kind of more capacity than we have, or is it that the size of the data set has gotten
So it's not from a standpoint that we can't run the system within the district. We have been for years, and we could continue to run it in the district. It's just making use of the expertise that their staff has. I mean, all they do all day is run PowerSchool. As far as the upgrades go, troubleshooting, hosting, capacity planning, and all of those kinds of things, that's all their team does. Our team has diverse responsibilities across many things. So we've had, like I mentioned, a couple of other products from PowerSchool that we use that they host. We've had good success with them hosting and running those products. There's not an exorbitant amount of downtime. The system's not offline a lot. So it just makes sense to include the student information system, which is kind of the core of everything we do as far as all of our other systems talking into their data center as well.
From an end user perspective, there'll be no difference.
Nope, there'll be a short downtime one evening where they take a backup of our data and import it onto their side, and then the same address that everyone's used for the last 15 plus years to access PowerSchool will continue to get them to PowerSchool. The PowerSchool system they're accessing will look exactly the same as it does now. The data will be the same. We'll still have all the historical data that we have in our current system now.
okay?
So I had a quick question, pardon my voice. So I've noticed as a parent that PowerSchool's been very glitchy lately, and some other parent friends have noticed that. My son is also, you just can't get in, and I'm assuming tech issues. So this will be great for users now that this will be farmed out. They'll be able to deal with this.
Yeah, it'll be in their data center. So, right now we're working with them trying to troubleshoot some issues that arise here and there. But they're migrants, so they're kind of tough to kind of iron down exactly. But with it being in their center, with their team running it, one would presume that none of those issues would continue to be. We haven't heard from any other districts that are hosting with PowerSchool that they suffer from similar issues.
Great, thank you.
I'm sorry, you said that you've spoken to other school districts who are doing this and they have experienced any?
No, actually, my understanding is we're kind of, at this point in time, kind of in the minority of districts that host PowerSchool themselves. Most districts that have moved to PowerSchool in the more recent years just started off having it hosted by PowerSchool, and others districts like us have started to explore moving it to having it hosted by PowerSchool.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. All right, up next we have Mr. Donaghy and our high school administrators here this evening to talk to us about the course selection guide.
This is like an elementary school presentation. We all have 2 lines, and we're going to keep going back and forth. Our course selection guide, first and foremost, can be found on our website. It's 120 pages. Okay, so we have a lot of courses at the high school. We have courses that are high-level student interests, that are current, that aren't trendy, but keep up with modern times. And you'll see some of that tonight in our presentation. With me tonight is Dr. Nesbitt, our assistant principals, Mr. Baradoni and Miss Edmonston. Our course selection guide, every year we survey the students on what courses they would like or course requests, sorry, not survey the students. I don't want to confuse anybody here. They do their course request. I'll start with the end and work my way back. In January and February, they pick courses for the next year. Through that process, we work with the teachers in the departments on what courses we offer. So you can see through our curriculum cycle and our curriculum reviews. So we're only bringing tonight to you one new course. We're making a couple changes that we're going to talk to you about to our present courses, but we're only bringing one new course because it takes a lot of time to plan new courses. We're kind of like Paramount Pictures. It takes a long time to get a movie off the ground. There's a lot of different channels that you need approval. Anything we do is obviously based on the Pennsylvania state standards. So it seems sometimes people ask me, can't you just start a new course? Or students are interested. They heard from a different high school that they have a different course. Can we start that course next year? So we look at these courses. It's a lot of discussion. It's a lot of planning to make sure that whatever we present to the board is vetted. Am I going too fast?
And while you're finding the right page, I will say last year we had,
Sorry.
it was a handful of new
Yes,
classes. There was it was a robust list touching different program areas and coursework and different levels of classes. So it's not that this is such a lengthy process that it prohibits it, because last year is a good example of seeing lots of
Sure.
new additions.
And in the last 6 years, we've probably presented over 20 new courses. So we just felt it was time to just take a slight break, evaluate what we have now. Our courses are full. The students like our offerings. The parents seem to like our offerings. We have a wide range of core courses and elective courses. And next year, one of the little previews is we're looking at our social studies offerings in our curriculum. And we're going to present that next year on some changes. So that's how long the process takes to add a new course to the cycle. So Mr. Baradoni is going to talk to you a little bit about a couple of the changes. Okay. Well, Dr. Nesbitt will talk to you first, about pre-calc, and then Mr. Baradoni will talk to you about the new options.
So AP Pre-Calculus, good evening, everyone. Good to see you again. AP Pre-Calculus is a brand new course. So when we're not in a math audit or science audit, but College Board deems that there's need for a new AP course, we always take a thorough look at what that AP course looks like. So we've been teaching pre-calculus at Haverford High School forever, and we've had great success. We have 250 to 300 kids taking pre-calculus, and then of those 250 to 300 students, probably close to 200 end up in AP calculus, or 225, and it, give or take every year. So we have a lot of success with our pre-calculus course. It prepares kids for AP calculus. We also have calculus honors that some students take, and that also prepares kids ultimately for AP Calc. Like some kids can take pre-calc, then calc, then AP Calc. This is just another sort of course in the mix. Students can now take AP pre-calc, and that could be their final high school class. They will get college credit for a pre-calculus course at college, and College Board and college universities have said, look, there's a lot of people that go into majors in which they don't need calculus. And so arriving at a university with college credit math courses already done that aren't necessarily calculus can be advantageous. We also have some really phenomenal math students here, and some will take, as sophomores or juniors, AP pre-calculus and then AP calculus. Students will still be permitted as sophomores and juniors to take pre-calc honors, and that will still prepare them to take AP calculus. So it is not a requirement that a student take AP pre-calculus to get into AP calculus. Our pre-calculus honors course will not change at all and has had tremendous success getting kids ready for AP calculus. But there will be some students that want a higher level pre-calculus. It basically will be just like our honors pre-calculus with 2 or 3 or 4 additional chapters added. And they're topics that are typically covered on what is called the Math SAT 2. They are not topics that are on your SAT exams, but if you really are going into the very strict math and maybe physics and maybe a couple engineering fields, it's a beneficial course for kids to experience a deeper understanding of some abstract math. So we will spend the summer writing that course and be prepared to teach it the following year. We're in the process of, it's brand new, and typically College Board will say, these 10 books we recommend to teach this course. They haven't actually produced the list of courses at this time. We expect that they will come out eventually. But we are really happy with the books that we're presently using, so we just have to evaluate whether our present book can be used to teach this course or whether we will need to purchase some books to support this class.
And I'll just add that we anticipate we can run this course without the need to add any staff.
Yeah, we expect that just some of the students that have previously taken pre-calc honors will select AP pre-calc, and so we'll just have less sections of pre-calc honors. We'll have some pre-calc honors, and we'll some have AP calc, and we do that all across the board in math, science, English, and social studies. We offer courses that are honors level and AP level, and it's still not a predecessor. It's still not a roadblock for the possibility of future success in AP calc.
So I'm just curious, could you kind of just discuss briefly the difference between advanced placement pre-calc and pre-calc honors? I mean, they sound very similar.
Yeah, so, I mean, the biggest difference is pre-calc honors, we design based upon what we think kids need to know to be successful in AP calculus. But you won't get any college credit for that course. And there are some mathematics that go into college level pre-calculus because it's sometimes a terminal course. It's not necessarily preparing everybody for calculus. And there are other avenues within math that you can go into after pre-calculus too, and it covers some of those concepts in there. And so the biggest difference is if you take AP pre-calculus, you will be able to sit for a College Board AP exam, pay the $100 or the reduced fee if you're eligible for reduced fees, and get a 3, 4, or 5 on that AP exam, and you will then likely get college credit for taking that course.
And honors is just not, it's, you don't have the same benefit or the same opportunity to take that college level test.
Correct, yep. So we have physics honors. Kids can be very successful in physics honors, and then they can take AP physics.
Okay.
They're similar. There's a little more content in AP physics than physics, but when they put the AP designation on it, you're eligible for taking a test and getting college credit for it.
Okay.
Can I just piggyback off of Dave's question? So I'm so sorry, I've lost my voice. I understand what you're saying, that makes sense. The AP pre-calc, you can get the college credits, and a lot of kids don't need calculus for their majors. But you did mention that students who did pre-calculus, honors pre-calculus, could also take then AP calculus. Just I'm confused why someone would, I totally get why your end game might be pre-calculus, but that would seem to me kind of to take honors pre-calc then AP calculus. What would be, I mean, I think you said there's like 3 different chapters, but.
So I always like to keep in consideration the balance of the student. So when a student is a sophomore, they may be taking AP World History, right? That's a 10th grade AP course. They may be a budding sophomore making the soccer team as a 10th grader, which is a tremendous time commitment. They may be in the band. They may also be in honors classes for English and social studies, and they may not want to commit to an additional AP class as a sophomore because of their work-life balance. But they can still, their junior year, take AP calculus. So it's one of those things where it's an option, but it's not a mandate. There are also kids who they're going to come in and they're going to take, their goal is literally to take every AP course they possibly can. Some of those students ultimately find out that they're more math and science students than English and social studies and world language students, and eventually they have to make decisions. You know, there's over 30 AP courses at Haverford High School, and kids have to decide with the balance of their schedule, how many APs am I going to take each year, and why, and where does it fit?
Thank you.
Yep.
And I guess just another question coming at it from the direction of the colleges, are you thinking that if a student has AP pre-calculus as their terminal math class, they could get college credit for it, but if they then go on and take AB or BC calculus, would a college give them 2 credits?
That is what we're being told, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Thanks, Dr.
Thanks.
Nesbitt.
Good evening. The other 2 courses up on the new options list are 2 additional alternate day courses. We have many students in our music programs and in other programs that take alternate day AB classes. So now that financial literacy, formerly personal finance, is a requirement for the class of 2026 and beyond, we want to offer that for more students to be able to get that. So we're going to offer that as an alternate day AB course for the first time next year. And another additional course that we're going to offer alternate day is practical wood. A lot of our students in support classes like those options to be hands-on. This offers more opportunities for students to have hands-on opportunities that they might not get with a different type of schedule that they took in the past. So we're always looking to broaden our offerings for the diverse student population that we have. And 3 updates to our courses. We're just changing some course names. The biggest update would be the manufacturing technology, what formerly was known to our students and our staff as the t-shirt making class. Many students loved that course. We are upping the ante on that course. It's now going to be called technology design, and we're going to have 2 offerings of it, a first level and a second level. And the reason we're going to do that, instead of just focusing on the end product that we've done in the past, the design and making the t-shirt, they're going to go through the entire design process. So they're going to work on brainstorming. They're going to use the 3D printers. They're going to sample things. They're going to try things. And then they're going to, if they have to, they go back and rework it and start from scratch and really go through the entire design process. So we're really trying to make that a course where students get a lot more out of it. And it also opens the opportunity for more students to want to take that. Some students didn't like the opportunity to make t-shirts. This really makes it a much more diverse course and much broader course. The other 2 options, fitness and sport, was new this year. We had changed the name, so talking with the phys ed department, they wanted to make sure we changed the name to functional fitness and cross training. Students were getting confused that it was basically a sports class and only for our athletes. This really makes it open to more students with the name change so that students know it's more of a life fitness course, so they learn how to do those things that they can take for the rest of their lives and really have those skills. And the final one is a social studies course that we've offered for a few years now. We're just changing the order of the name. Choices in Crisis, Study of the Holocaust. A lot of times that can get lost on what they're learning. So we really want to focus on what the course is. It's about the Holocaust, so we're changing it to Holocaust, a study of choices in crisis, so students really have that opportunity to realize what that is up front, instead of waiting until they're in the course and they didn't realize what they actually picked. So just a name change on those courses, but those are the updates to the courses for next year.
Thank you, Mr. B. Dr. Nesbitt. This is like an elementary presentation.
Now you're going through the next presentation. There you go.
I apologize.
That's it.
And like Mr. B said, and Dr. Nesbitt, you saw from AP pre-calculus to looking at a gym class and making sure the name's correct. So a lot of work goes into the 120 pages, a lot of thought, a lot of collaboration with our curriculum coordinators, our teachers, Ms. Saxa. I mean, it's not just as simple as just changing the name from A to B. There's a lot that goes into it so that we can get it right, so that student-friendly, it's parent-friendly, and we continue, you know, you're going to see our scores in a minute. We're very proud of those. But as you can see, the state of Pennsylvania wants us to do more than test scores, and we kind of agree with them on that point, okay? Because we're definitely more than a test score. We do well on tests. We do well on pre-calculus. But we're more than just a test score. So the state of Pennsylvania, and Ms. Edmondson's going to talk a little bit about this, gave us some new requirements. So this is another reason we're just slowing down our processes to make sure that they're in line with the state. They always are. The state tries to keep us on our toes, which is great. And we always respond favorably to whatever they throw at us. So Ms. Edmondson's going to talk to you a little bit about our graduation pathways.
Good evening, everyone. As Mr. Donaghy said, we're talking about graduation pathways. Our students are plan college and career ready. So we want every one of our students, and we always have done this, to have a path before they leave. So in a lot of ways, this is nothing new to the high school. We'll review all seniors, so all seniors need to have met one of the pathways up there for graduation. So right now, we're reviewing all the seniors, and we've actually gone through that. We're going through that again. We're working with any individual who has to follow a specific pathway. So some students need to apply to Delaware County, need to apply to four-year schools. It's going to be part of their pathway to meet that graduation requirement. So our counselors are right on top of things with all of them. We're getting in touch, by the end of this week, we'll be notifying parents and guardians as to what some of them are going to need to do. Delaware County is going to come out and do a presentation and have whatever student, whether they need the pathway or not, who wants to go to Delaware County, they will come into the school, they will all do their application, and Delaware County will waive the fee. So it's a great way for any student that's looking to be able to go next year. And then we continue to incorporate into students at the high school any experience moving through the grades, whatever they can do. And we're looking now, as Mr. Baradoni said, we have our personal finance. All of our students need to take that. So we're looking to incorporate something into maybe personal finance that will lead kids on that pathway that they might not meet by having their Keystone scores that high or whatever the issue may be. We have a lot of students that go to tech, which really helps too. That's their graduation pathway. So we work with each of them. We're meeting with each of them. It's the first year we're doing this, so there's a lot of collaboration with other districts because everybody's looking to see how every student can meet their pathways.
Let me see if I can get the clicker to go the right way. It's this new technology. These students back here, I think, were messing with me. And then college and career ready is a big theme, obviously, at the high school. We just had a job fair last week where we had 30 local businesses, entry-level jobs, meet with our juniors and seniors in a job fair setting in our gymnasium. We went over with the juniors and seniors some tips on how to get a job, So it was just another great experience that the teachers in our business department added to try to bring real life experiences to the high school. So our curriculum guide is our courses, their names, a description, but it's more of a living document to us, 120 pages. It's a living, breathing document, and you can see all the people involved with the document. I would definitely take a look at it. We have a cheat sheet in there of just our offerings. We give that to the 8th graders when we go down to the middle school and students who transfer in. So we reduced it to 2 pages with just the names in a nice template. So you can take a look at our courses. And of course, if you ever have any questions, just send us an email or call us and we can explain to you, how everything works. Does anybody have any questions for the panel?
I will say, as a parent who has a high school student and recently had one, the course selection guide is an impressive document. I think it's robust, like incredibly robust. It seems like there are so many more offerings than what I remember my high school path to be. And in addition to having all of those classes broken out by the different kind of science or math or English fields, there's a lot of information in there about planning ahead to think, because with the block scheduling, 4 classes a quarter, and some of them are year long, like it helps to even as a 9th grader start thinking
Correct.
about the ways in which classes you want to take and how you're going to fit them in. So yeah, that's a lot of good information in there. I was also going to just highlight the personal finance, which I think it's great that's going to have the AB schedule option. That's one in the state of Pennsylvania has been proposed as a new graduation requirement, and we are ahead of the curve on that. So I think it's great that our students have that exposure now as part of everybody's graduation requirement before the state even has to tell us to do it.
We're usually ahead of the curve. And Miss Connolly, too, I forgot to introduce her. She's our humanities coordinator. She's here with us tonight, too. Our curriculum coordinators do a great job, and we usually stay ahead of the curve. Miss Sachs is always ahead of the curve. And I forgot our tagline because the clicker messed me up. Astronomy to ukulele. We have every course in between alphabetical. The students here will tell you about all our different courses, too. So that's our tagline. I left that out. Yeah.
And our typical process, just so the board is aware, we will ask that whoever's reporting out from this committee just share this information in the committee report at our next board meeting, which is December 1st. And then this guide will be on the agenda asking for your approval on December 15th. And that way you have an opportunity to hear about it again and see if there are any other questions. We'll be happy to answer them. And then once it is approved, then we will be able to publish it to families to take a look, and then students will begin their registration process. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Mr. Donaghy.
And can you spell ukulele?
UK
Don't look at me.
Alele.
I'll look it up.
Lots of E's and L's.
Yeah.
Thank you. Great. All right, our next and final presentation this evening is our academic performance update. And we have several people who will be presenting, but Ms. Christina Carter is going to introduce it and kick us off in looking backward at our academic performance from the 21-22 school year.
Thank you. Now let's see if I can get the clicker. So, and I'm guessing just forward. Perfect. All right, so good evening again to the members of the board. I am the Director of Learning and Assessment, and I'm here with Dr. Gary Moyer. He is our Student Information Systems and Data Coordinator. You heard about PowerSchool. He does a lot of our work with PowerSchool. He's really good with that. And members of our curriculum department, along with Ms. Exa, who will be presenting some of the data throughout the evening. So if you have a data gaze over your face, just let us know if you need us to pause when we start getting excited about the data we're talking about. So, As a reminder, we are guided in all of our work by the district's mission and pillars. You've seen this many times, but we always like to discuss the importance of addressing a wide spectrum of needs for all of our students, which we do when we look at the data and see what we need to address it. I will hand it over to Mrs. Saxa to go over some of our assessments this evening.
Great. Thank you, Christina. On this slide here, you can see the sort of the big picture of the many, many ways that we assess student performance. There are measures of both academic achievement as well as the non-academic factors that we like to see how well students perform using. This evening, we're going to focus on PSSA, Keystones, Advanced Placement, and ACT and SAT performance. So you're getting really the left side of this column, more of the left side than the right side. However, at future meetings, we will be back to share more information about MTSS and how we use the results from things like the MAP growth, which you see up there, and Ames Web, as well as curriculum-based assessments and grades that inform our instruction and inform our programming and our curriculum. And then at other future meetings, we will also report out on some of those non-academic things like the psychological sense of school membership survey that happens annually, just sort of some numbers from our MySaber screening and the interventions that we're able to do there, and other non-academic performance information. But today's sort of more about the left-hand side there. We do measure academic success in so many ways, and this includes national and state assessments like the SAT and the PSSA. We also use what are called universal screeners. So those are things like Ames Web and MAP growth, where all students take it, and it's more about trying to understand what instruction they will need this year, as opposed to did they learn what we taught them this year. So we use those, but I also just want to emphasize something that you don't typically get to see reported out on, and that's the use of daily formative assessments. So those are the checks for understanding that teachers are doing continually throughout lessons. They have planned checks for understanding. I'm going to ask this question. I'm going to look for answers that look like this. I'm going to make sure the kids know this before I move on to teach the next thing. So I just wanted to mention that, because when we think about assessments, sometimes we think about paper pencil, but really teachers are assessing all the time about how their students are learning. So we will move to the next slide. And we usually in this presentation just sort of share the state of the union on assessments each year. You know, what are the trends we're seeing? And this happens to be a year where you may have actually read about some of this in the news, as opposed to a different year where you'd have to like comb through the education magazines to get this information. So I just have a couple of links up there. You're welcome to click, once you have the presentation in front of you, on the sources so you can see what they lead to. I just want to bring this up so that, everyone is aware of the context of this information that we're about to share. You'll see that in certain grade levels and disciplines, we are following these trends, and in other grade levels and disciplines, we are bucking these trends. So we'll try and mention that as we go throughout. I'm just going to start by going over a few things. In the upper left-hand corner here, it talks about SAT scores and the decline that was seen nationwide from 2021 to 2022. The mean score went from 1060 to 1050, which is a 10-point difference for the mean score. Later, we are going to report out on our own scores. We actually saw an increase of 10 points in our mean. So Gary will share a little bit more information about that later. In the upper right-hand corner there, you can see information about the National Assessment of Educational Progress, or the NAEP assessment, or you may have heard this as like the nation's report card on the schools. Sometimes it's described that way. Much of the reporting, and there was a lot of it, has been talking about the fact that most states saw a decline in both math and reading scores in both 4th and 8th grade students. So that's nationally. Our 4th grade students actually performed at a little bit higher rate proficiency compared with last year in both ELA and math. And our 8th grade students performed a little bit higher over 2021 in English language arts, but they did dip in math, which is something we saw nationally. On the bottom left-hand side, there's a little blurb there about the ACT scores. This actually made some headlines too, because it's the lowest scores that they've seen in ACT scores in the last 30 years is what was reported. We saw a slight decline in ACT scores, not to the degree that you saw reported. We are still far above those averages that you see here. Again, Dr. Moyle will report out on that in a little bit. And then finally, on the bottom right, you can see just a statement from the U.S. Secretary of Education reminding, this information went out to states, just reminding them that the test scores from the 21-22 school year are really should be used as information and to try and understand which school districts might need resources as opposed to being a way to penalize schools or districts for performance that isn't where it usually is. So that's sort of the state of the nation in test scores. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Christina, and we're going to start discussing our achievement results.
Thank you. So before we take a deep dive into our PSSA and Keystone Achievement and Growth, let's take a moment and look at the PSSA participation over the past few years. You will notice that we are starting to rebound in our participation on the assessment. So when you look back to before the pandemic, if anybody can remember that time, you can see where we were and where we are now for last year, for 2021, 2022, where we're starting to have some more participation again. We will continue to help our families understand the importance of participating and how it helps us to just see how students are doing year to year. Although we have many other assessments, it is a good touching point for us to understand where students are at the end of the year. As a reminder, and you're going to hear me say it over and over again, and probably Ms. Saxon will say the same thing, there are no scores for 2020 because of the pandemic. We did not take the assessment. You'll probably be able to say it with me by the time I get to it for each slide. Okay, here on this slide, you're seeing our ELA performance. A few things that I would like to note when looking at this. Again, you're going to see that line where it's 2020, there are no scores due to the pandemic. These scores do not represent a cohort of students, but is a snapshot of students who tested that current school year. Now we will look at the students who are proficient in advance. We expect that our students are going to achieve higher than the state. We have a high standard for our students, and we rise to the occasion each and every year when we look at it. So when we look at our scores, we have 81.7% of our students who were at or above proficiency, which means they were proficient or advanced on the assessment. We have improved from 2021 to 2022 in our groups of students scoring at or above proficient. Our teachers are really working hard each year to make sure that we just keep our students with the same skills and the ability to stay on grade level as much as possible. And those who need additional help, we continue to help them. Although they advise us not to compare our 2021 scores as a comparison due to the participation rate, you will see that as our participation rose, so did our achievement as we go along in the slides. In comparison to the state, our students are performing significantly higher, as I said. There is a 27.1 difference between the district and the state. Currently, we do not have comparisons, which I know everybody loves, between the different school districts that are comparable with us. But right now, we're presenting pretty early in comparison to when the state actually puts out the data. That ends up coming later. We typically see it first. And then what ends up going up on the public site, which is PBOS for us, that's really the 21 data that's still out there. So that'll come later after districts have a chance and we're able to then compare ourselves to our comparable districts. On this slide, when you look at it, there's a lot of lines there. This represents our student groups disaggregated out to see how each subgroup did. I always like to celebrate our students in different ways. This is one of them where I like to say, like, we have 81.7% of our students, I said before, are proficient in advance. Many of our subgroups are performing close to or above that aggregate. So that's a great way for us to celebrate. But in that celebration, we also have to look at our areas of growth as a district. And the groups that we need to provide the most support and focus right now is for our students with IEPs, our ELL students, and our African American subgroup. I always like to note, no matter whenever I present data, that low performance of a subgroup does not mean that that group innately does not have the ability to perform at the level of their peers. They do. It's our job as educators to really identify what those barriers are and help them get there. And many of the people you see sitting here today are the very people that are working to identify and help our students to continue to grow and achieve what they do. Lastly, when looking at the data, you'll see why we have MTSS. And you'll learn about that more in the spring, but MTSS really helps us identify how to support many of the students in the subgroups as we go along. And when we think about supporting our students with IEPs, you've heard Mrs. Battistelli talk about it before, but we have an ELA audit for our students with IEPs coming up, so we can see how we can continue to support them as they matriculate along within our district. Here's our mathematics performance. So, like the previous slide, you do not see 2020 data. Our students, again, are performing better in comparison to the state despite the pandemic. In comparison, our students are above the state at 25.2. But we also have to note that we are at 59.6% for our students at advanced or proficient, and we continue to work really hard to support our students so that they can continue to achieve at a higher level as they move along. We will see that, again, with the increase of participation, we also see an increase each year of our scores, even slightly for this one. Alongside our data, our curriculum supervisor, Dr. Nesbitt, continues to look at our current NWEA MAP assessment data, looking at the benchmarks to see how our students are doing in real time. Because this gives us a snapshot at the end of the year, but that really helps us to see how students are doing every day in the classroom and how we can provide the supports right there in the moment. You'll hear about this more in the spring as well. Again, looking at the disaggregated data for the subgroups, again, celebrating many of our subgroups are still meeting at the level our aggregate data is, but we still have work to do, and we still will continue to work. As a whole, we have work to do, and we're going to continue to strive to do even better, but we also know that we're going to continue to help our students with IEPs, our African-American students, our historically underperforming, and our economically disadvantaged students. I always like to note on this that some students can fall in some of the same categories. So it's not just, they're only in this subgroup. So it's still representing across all areas. All of our buildings have goals to address disproportionality in higher level courses, and through that work, they're really seeing how to address students who may not be achieving at the level we know that they have the ability to, and figuring out those barriers to get them to that level. We've heard many of them talk about it. They are very passionate about the work they're doing, and I'm excited to see where they go with that work so we can make sure that all of our students have access opportunity to achieve at the very highest level. Also, when we think about our economically disadvantaged students, we have 2 of our schools that are identified as Title I schools. But we will continue to work to make sure that our schools who have the most economically disadvantaged students, we will continue to look at the data to allocate the funds the most equitably between those schools. So the last bit for our PSSA data is for our science assessment. They only take the science assessment in 4th and 8th grade. So again, our students are performing at a high level at 84.2% at above proficient. And so proficient and advanced, some of our students. In comparison to the state, our students are performing 22 points above the state level, which I think is phenomenal. We have some very innovative students, and many of the things we're doing today in our classrooms, we can see why it's making a difference for our students in their love for science, which is different than what you see in comparison at the state level. Here again is our disaggregated data, celebrating the same thing that we see even higher numbers for those subgroups I talked about before. We're seeing that some of those groups are performing at a higher level. When I was speaking with Mrs. Battistelli today, we like to celebrate that our ELL learners, they are performing pretty high as well when we think about science. So we're proud of them and proud of their work that we're doing, but we know that we will continue to help our students with IEPs, our historically underperforming, and our economically disadvantaged to continue to perform high. And please stop me if you have any questions. So this next set has to do with our Keystone data. These graphics look different but display the same information. We wanted to provide the Keystone data as a whole for each year instead of by the test session. As I'm sure you're aware, we give the Keystone test twice a year, so in the winter and the spring, but we wanted to make sure that we represented the students as a whole by bringing it all together so you can see it that way instead of by the testing session. As you look at our data, you will see the comparison between 2021-2022 school year. The purple bar represents the students who are at or above proficient. We, again, are above the state level of proficient in advanced in literature by 26.8 points. Also, it is important to note that our data reflects a sampling across grade sets and not just one particular grade, because they can take the assessment based off of when they take the trigger course, and then that prepares them to be able to take the assessment. And they can, if they may not get the score needed at the moment, they could take it again. So it just depends on when they take it, so it's across our grade sets. We keep working consistently to help our students to achieve, but we're happy to say that they're in the 78% year to year, so that consistency is very good when we look at how our high school students are performing. Okay, here we're looking at our algebra keystone. So again, that purple bar represents our students that are at advanced or proficient. We again maintain year to year for the most part with how our students are performing. And most notably, we can see even an increase in the percentage of students scoring at advanced or proficient in our number of students. But we also know we need to work on our students that are scoring below basic. We had an increase in that area, and we want to continue to support those learners as well. We performed at a difference from the state at 36.39. Our curriculum department continues to help our lowest achieving learners to close that gap and to find different ways to meet their needs so that they can be as successful as others as well.
Could I just ask, I'm sorry, with the math 3 to 8 was the area of the PSSAs where compared to the English or the ELA and the science, that overall score was lower. It was like 59.6 versus the other ones. And I'm just curious, is there some correlation?
You're talking about, hold on, let me go
So
back.
yeah, just looking at the math where it wasn't as strong as the
here.
other subjects, but then at the keystones, the math scores were stronger. Like, how do you interpret that? Are they just two different tests, or?
Well, they
I
are
think
two
something happened
different
in high
tests, but I'll let
school.
Mrs. Sexton.
I think I have to say, we are pretty proud of our Algebra 1 programming here. There are a couple of things that are options for Algebra 1 that are a little different than they are for ELA. Number one, students can take algebra in 8th grade. Many of our students take Algebra 1 in 8th grade, and they all pass. I think there was one year where one student didn't pass, that I can recall, in my memory, that I can recall. One, yeah. Then we also have Algebra 1 for a semester at the high school. Students take that as 9th graders if they want to. But we also have a year-long algebra for students who we recognize ahead of time may have a harder time passing the algebra exam. They get 80 minutes of algebra all year long. And that is the course that really can help pick up and support students in that particular course in a way that's different than what we do with ELA. ELA, we do have a year-long course option for kids. It is during 9th grade because we believe that getting them prepared for English at the high school level is important enough that it's not in 10th grade when they are taking the Keystone. We want them prepared for 10th grade before they get to the Keystone, right? So that Keystone trigger course isn't until 10th grade. So there is the option in all 3 of these subjects for kids to take year-long as an option. It's just a matter of when they do it.
Just clarify,
Yeah.
when you said 1 year where one person didn't pass, is below basic counting as a pass?
No, below basic and basic are not passing, and proficient and advanced are passing. Thank you for letting me clarify that, right.
I have a question. You know, throughout my tenure, the math scores at the state level and in our district and in surrounding districts, the math scores are always considerably lower. And I think we've had representatives from our district serve on some of the state committees. That what is it? Are the tests unreasonable? Why would the state?
That's a great question.
Why would the state, the state proficiency level be 29%? Is it,
I had a conversation
Do you want to go
You
to the
come-
mic?
So Pennsylvania tests in 7th and 8th grade are particularly challenging. I think it would be interesting to give that test to a general population and see how most adults would perform on that. We use MAP growth testing at the elementary level, K to 5. Started using it last year. It's a standards aligned and nationally normed test. And it turns out in order to score advanced in 3rd grade, if you take the nationally normed test, Pennsylvania is a criterion reference test. They don't norm it. But if you take the nationally normed test in 3rd grade and score in the 50th percentile, you're an advanced scorer in math. In order to be an advanced scorer in math in 8th grade, you have to be above the 80th percentile. So the same student, if I'm a 50th percentile student in 3rd grade, and I'm still a 50th percentile student in 4th grade, and I'm still a 50th percentile in 5th grade, I have to go from being a 50th percentile student to an 85th percentile student to remain advanced on the PSSA exam from grades 3 to 8. It's one of the only states that the MAP growth sees that. They link their studies with all sorts of other states, and they say that Pennsylvania is one of a very few anomalies that have rising expectations, not just high expectations, but increased expectations for every student as you go along. They've also normed the ELA test, and it's much closer where you need to be at about the 43rd, 45th percentile to be an advanced student nearly in every grade. And that changes plus or minus about 6 points, but it's not the drastic swing that we see in math.
it just makes you wonder what the purpose of the test is.
I was going to wait till the end, but I have a lot here. Grades 3 through 8 for the math PSSAs, there's 41% of our students that are below basic or basic. I think that's abysmal. I started reflecting when I looked on this and on my own experience as a parent in the district. My oldest entered the district in 2012, and since that time, I counted, there have been 3 elementary math programs. My youngest now in 3rd grade, they do Eureka Math. Before that, my middle son did Math in Focus, and then I realized my oldest son started out Linwood with, was it called University of Chicago Math, perhaps? Or I don't.
Everyday math?
Okay, but it was a Chicago type math. So I would love to see the scores from like across the program. I would love to see how the scores look from, I don't know when you started with the Chicago type math, and see how the scores have changed between all the programs. That intrigues me. Since, it seems not that long of a time from 2012 to now 2022, 3 elementary math programs that I've had experience with in a short period of time. I have noticed as a parent, and sorry, no one's going to like saying this, but I don't care. I've noticed a lot of changes, decreased content as a parent. I've noticed stuff, my older sons will call it, we did clocks. Why is Shane doing clocks in 3rd grade? We did clocks in kindergarten and 1st. Shane doesn't know how to multiply yet. We all need to multiply in 2nd grade. And I know COVID obviously plays a part, but it is interesting. The clocks kind of stuck with me. That didn't seem like a 3rd grade content area. I've noticed a decrease in rigor. My children had homework at Linwood from 2012 till my middle son finished in 2020. There is no more homework. And when you take that out, you take away parental involvement. And with the math test only coming home 7 times a year in 3rd grade, I have no idea what in God's name my child's doing until I get that test, so I can't help them. Now, I know if my child is failing, I have no doubt their teacher's going to reach out. But, I don't want just not failing to be the standard. Like, if I want them to do as best as they can and, be able to support them, to be able to be out and say, hey, Shane, can you tell me what time it is? Like, I'm not needing to drill my child or by any stretch of the words, but that to me seems problematic. I know you're saying the test might, Pennsylvania has a high standard of test. I'm curious if the test always remained the same since 2012, so I'd love to see test scores across that, but I don't feel comfortable just blaming it all on the state of Pennsylvania. I've seen changes in content, rigor, parental involvement, even things like, that were so helpful to my older boys, reflex math, multiplication. I had a nun who handed me a sheet, told me to memorize times table. I thought reflex math, when the district had it, was wonderful. And I'm not a big app computer person, but just drilling you a multiplication facts. And I purchased it for $40 for a year for my son. He's learning to multiply because of that. I mean, multiplication is just repetition and drill. And I think I'm not comfortable just blaming it on the state. I think there's some questions that need to be asked. And I just think 41% of our students below basic or basic is concerning, is really concerning.
No, I appreciate your sharing that. And we will get into, in a few slides, a breakdown a little bit of the grades by grade. So what you see here is 3 through 8, all of that group, right? So you're seeing an average. And so you will see a breakdown of that. I will just mention in 2015 is the year that the tests themselves changed. So any comparison is typically gone. They've told us don't compare anything that happened before 2015 started. PSSA changed. Keystones did not. PSSA changed at that time. So that would be sort of a good starting point to look backward. We did look backward in this, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes, about getting back to pre-pandemic levels. And there are a couple of grades and a couple of subjects where we've gotten back, but by no means have we gotten there in all of those. I will just mention, I was just talking with the elementary principals today about homework and what is happening with homework. And we all know that throughout the pandemic, when we were learning from home and we were hybrid learning and we were coming back from all that, certainly making sure every kid had their homework done every night was not as high a priority as making sure that everybody was sort of okay and in school and doing the things they needed to. But we recognize that that may have carried over in a way that needs to be addressed. And so we are addressing that both through our curriculum meetings. Principals are talking through that, and they've started to sort of ask around, like, tell me what you're assigning now. Let's talk through this. And we're going to have some more time at our meetings to sort of get a little bit more back on track. I recognize that, homework is a way for us to stay involved as parents with what our kids are learning. And so we want to not only be aware of homework as that purpose, but are there also other ways to make sure? Does it have to be just homework? Are there more, assessments that we can send home, formative assessments, so you can see them along the way?
I understand people have different feelings about homework. I am a pro-homework parent. I could list to you 1,000 reasons. Not excessive homework, not busy work homework, but you cannot help your child if you do not know what they're doing at school. And that's very much how I felt recently when, sorry, Dr. Rushi, I'm bringing up the tape graphs, but like when my son came to me and said, I'm nervous, I have a test, tape graphs with 2 steps, and I had no idea what a tape, T-A-P-E, since my voice is, no clue how to help him, and it broke my heart. And it's just not a good place to be. And these are the students. I mean, believe me, that year, the first grade year in COVID, if you would have tried to give me homework, I would have broke down at we were at the computer, there was all day sitting at the kitchen table. There was a reason that it needed to cease that year, and that's completely understandable. I just think we're back. I know COVID's still here, obviously, but I think some bad habits we've fallen into, and these are our students. I see with my youngest who are behind. They lost so much time. And I do see in other districts, Lower Merion, Unionville, Chadds Ford, Tredyffr, and Easton, they are back to homework. Private schools, my son's same age peers are having it. I think we're a little behind here.
Well, we appreciate that, that feedback, because it certainly always helps us to take a look at what is happening and really hear from the end user. We heard that term before, the end user experience, so that we can help sort of guide what our focus needs to be. So I do appreciate that. I know that we were sort of finishing up with Keystones, but we will get back to that, some more information about PSSA and PBOS in a couple of minutes. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Nesbitt, for giving us a little bit more of an explanation. Thank you for your insight as well. Here on this last slide for Keystone, You see the biology keystone here. A highlight for this assessment is that we have a notable increase in students scoring proficient or advanced in comparison to the previous year. We again are significantly above the state at proficient and advanced by 38.84, which is phenomenal. It really just shows the hard work that our departments are doing with our students. We continue to work to address our students who are scoring below basic. I know our teachers are passionate about helping our students to achieve at their highest level, to learn the skills they need to actually not only pass the assessment, but to be able to apply it in life and the work they do going forward, because that's really the most important part, is that they can use it and apply it as they move forward. We have many dedicated teachers and administrators at the high school who I just want to thank for us being able to see this growth from year to year for our students, and I know they'll continue to do that same work. Before we move on, I know Mrs. Saxa will be walking us through the growth data based on each assessment. We're excited to share this information as we're continuing to learn as administrators, which we love to do. It's not just the students who want to learn or the teachers, we also want to learn as administrators. And we recently had the opportunity as instructional administrators to learn from some PDE consultants on PVAS growth reports and how to utilize them in the best way, because the state updates their information as well. So we always like to be on our toes and know how to use the information. We've been using it before, but we want to continue to use it and use all the new reports to help us meet the needs of many of our students. I'm sure you'll hear Mrs. Saxa touch on some of those areas as she moves forward in speaking about our growth.
Thank you. Bless
God
you.
bless you.
Thank you.
So thank you, Christina. The next measure that we'll discuss uses the same information, the PSSA and the Keystone score, but it uses it differently. It compares the scores of groups of students with data from test takers across the state in order to determine the growth of each group of students. So for math and ELA PSSAs, this means that they are comparing groups of our students' scores with groups of similarly scoring students across the state in order to determine their relative position to one another. So PVAS growth tells us if our groups of students have either maintained with other similar scoring, have gained on those, or who have lost ground within the relative position of the whole group. For science and keystones. So PSSAs, they take every year, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th. So they can use that predictive growth, not predictive. They can use that growth comparison, the relative position. For science and for keystones, they do not take them every year. So they calculate it just a little bit differently. Instead, they take all of the data for a student, not just their science score, but their reading scores, their ELA and their math scores, and they make a prediction based on how students who usually score, like this student scored, or this group of students scored. We predict this group of students will score here when they eventually do take the science PSSA, or when they eventually do take the Keystone. So that's more predictive for those. So the PVAS tells us, did they meet that prediction? Did they go above that prediction? Did they not meet that prediction for those subjects? If you actually go on the website for the state, they'll tell you it should remind us of those growth charts that we may have seen from our pediatricians, where there's sort of a traditional trajectory, and you want to make sure your child is sort of following along with the trajectory, and it's when they fall out of that or really fall below those sort of typical passages that they may start running some tests or ask some questions, right? So that's their recommendation at the state level, is to use this information similarly. And I think it's interesting, and I think our data shows us this as well, that they really recommend you got to use this in context with the achievement data. You've got to use this in context with your own curriculum-based data. You can't just use one data point. Don't just use achievement, because achievement often reflects lots of things, including socioeconomic status. There are studies from 1960s forward that show straight up achievement does that. But also use growth, because some of their studies show that growth does not change according to socioeconomic status. So make sure you're using lots of different points as you're making determinations about what your students know and are able to do. So we put together here a couple of different points on one slide, and I know those numbers are small, so I'll read out loud what you might need to see. So we'll just start with the top graph itself, just to orient ourselves to the actual table. So you'll see that the grades are listed vertically. See 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, sort of in that second column. And then you'll see that there are sort of 2 lines to every row. The district is the top one, and then the state is the second one. So that's the same for 3rd grade, and then district, then state for 4th, district, state for 5th, et cetera. If you follow along to the actual colorful bar graphs there, you'll see that in blue, all the way to the right of this more solid black line, the blue scores are the percentage of our students who scored advanced, and the green are the percentage of our students who scored proficient. And then yellow, if you go past the line, those are the students not considered proficient. Yellow is basic, and that sort of salmon-y color is below basic. And this lists 3rd, as you said, as you saw, 3rd through 8th grade. But you can see it, it's nice because you can see it in comparison with the state, right? So you can see sort of the trend for the state going down and the trend for us going down. So just a couple of things to talk about on this graph here, just the top section for now. As Christina said, we like to have celebrations, right? So we continue to see higher levels of proficient or advanced than you see across the state. This is English language arts broken down by grade for achievement. We always expect to outperform the state. We are looking forward to when we have some scores from some similar districts so that we can see how we compare with them when it comes to achievement and growth. That is not out yet. They have not given us any indication when that will come out, but we always look forward to that. So in the meantime, we sort of look at the delta between our proficient and advanced and the state's proficient or advanced. And for these particular scores, that ranges from 23 percentage points difference to 30 percentage points difference. It's very interesting that grade 4 outperforms the state by the most percentage points, which is 30. We did 30 percentage points higher than the state, while grades 6 and 8 have the smallest differential with 23 percentage points. So it's still outperforming by a lot, but just so you can know sort of relatively where our strength lies there. Also notable is that grades 4 and 7 in ELA, which is what we're looking at here, grades 4 and 7, we've returned to at least pre-pandemic levels of proficiency. And in grades 4, 7, and 8, we've returned to at least pre-pandemic levels of advanced, percentage of students scoring advanced. So this, again, this same PSSA information that you see in this top chart here is used, that these data are used to develop the PVOS scores that are pictured in the lower table. So on this lower table, you see the grades. You'll notice it starts with 4, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. They don't have 3 because you can't grow from 3rd grade because it's the first year you're taking the assessment. So there is no 3. So then you have the growth designation, which is a description, well below, below, meets, above, well above. And then you see the little range there of where it falls on that spectrum of growth. And then there's a series of numbers following the chart. And those numbers show where the group entered as far as achievement is and where the group left as far as achievement is. And then the final number is the end count, so how many students took the exam that year. So again, for ELA, these PVOS scores compare how groups of students maintain their relative position among other test takers. So for example, I just shared lots of great news, and I went sort of fast, but I'll reiterate, lots of great news about grade 4 ELA. They have the highest differential between us and the state, 30 percentage points higher than the state. We are back to pre-pandemic levels of proficiency and back to pre-pandemic levels of advanced for grade 4. Grade 4 is one of the highest levels of proficiency among the tested grades. If you look at the chart there, you can see it's sort of the farthest out to the right with ELA. All these really great things about grade 4 ELA, right? And then you'll look at grade 4 PVOS, it says well below. And it's the only one that says well below there, right? So this tells us that there's something in the data. While our students outperform themselves, outperform the state, they, when compared with their relative position with others, they did not meet the expectation to maintain their relative position with others. So that's information for us that we need to look at, and you can actually drill down and look at which groups of students. So for example, for this particular group, the high achieving students didn't meet the growth, but our basic, below basic and proficient students actually exceeded the growth. But we have so many advanced students that the numbers of the advanced students are great enough to bring sort of the average growth to well below, despite the fact that those other three groups of students outperformed their expectation. So obviously, this is something we want to make sure we're looking at. We want to see how do we continue to push these students, what is happening in those, who exactly didn't meet those expectations, and what can we be doing about that. And that's where we can use things like time in our MTSS classes, where we can look at working with specific teachers and talking through how do we help those students.
Can I just ask
Yeah.
a question?
Mhm.
So how does it work? So let's say we had fourth graders, a lot of high performing advanced students, and I don't know what the scale is, but let's say they already were getting like a 95 out of 100. How much room for growth is there? Like, is there some expectation that like maintaining, and is that what this is telling us, that maintaining a 95 isn't growing because, but there's not that much more room to score higher points? Like, or
Right. No, that's a sort of a common thing that we find ourselves talking about a lot when we talk about PVAS. It's not that they necessarily have to get to 96, 97, 98. It's how did everybody do? Did everybody stay around 95 and we stayed around 95? Great, we maintained. Did everybody go down to 80 and we stayed at 95? Then we exceeded. You know, it's sort of how do we compare with the other groups? So it is possible to grow at those higher levels. I will tell you, you're going to look at other districts, you look at us for the last however long they've had PVAS, you look at the group that has the hardest time growing is always the high achieving students. And that is just a trend. It is not to say that it's how it should be or that it shouldn't be addressed. It just is a trend that we have seen. When you talk to the PVAS people, they are very clear, which Christina mentioned, we had training from them. They're very clear that it's important that everybody grow. You want everybody to be as blue as possible, right? You really have to make sure that your focus is particularly on the below basic and the basic students, because you want to make sure, I mean, if they're already below grade level and they're only maintaining, that's not good enough for them, right? Because then they're going to maintain being below and they will never catch up. So that's the group you really want to make sure is blue. And then, you know, of course you want to get everybody to blue, but that's sort of like what they were suggesting as a focus. So I will, since we're talking about blue, I'll celebrate. You see middle school up there. Let's have some more celebrations. We have 7th and 8th grade, as well as 5th grade, getting into the well above. So those students sort of outperformed what was projected based on, you know, their relative position there. And that led, though there are so many in those that you'll see our final rating, the final bottom one across grades is actually well above. So you can see there, you know, informations, things we need to go digging in and see what happens in 4th grade, what happens in 6th grade, how does it work with our achievement data, what do our other data tell us, and, you know, start using all of the information to plan next steps. So I'm going to take us now to the math. And I just will point out, as sort of what we were talking about a minute ago, if you don't even have to know what the numbers are, just look at how the colors slant to the left, right? So you start off in 3rd grade, sort of pretty far over to the right, and then you come down and you see by the end of 8th grade, for us and the state, you can see there is really a precipitous decline in math scores. There really is, and this is lower because it is post-pandemic, it is lower, but you'll see 8th grade, 22% of 8th graders in the state of Pennsylvania passed the PSSA, 22% this past school year. And I will tell you that that would be shocking if it weren't that in the years past, it was 34%. So pre-pandemic, it was maybe it was 32% one year, 34, maybe it was 37 another year of 8th graders passed the PSSA. So I am not saying that. There is no excuse. We are a high-performing district. We need to outperform that like crazy. Absolutely, we do. And you will see in a typical pre-pandemic year, not only would you see us well above on scoring, but you would see us far to the right when you're looking at, which is the good direction for growth. You'd see we were high achieving and high growth in math PSSAs typically. So I just point that out because I like to provide context, and it sort of talks a little bit about what we were talking about earlier. Again, we expect to outperform the state. We have a delta in these scores that ranges again from 23 percentage points at least higher than the state to 27 percentage points higher than the state. Grade 3 outperforms the state by the most. Grade 4 has the second biggest differential. Grades 5 and 6 have the smallest differential, which is 23.1 and 23.7 between us and the state. So now we're going to look again at the second chart, right? Now we're going to look at the PVOS, the lower one. We see 2 designations of grades that are well below growth expectations. So once again, in grade 4, we actually are back to pre-pandemic levels of proficiency. It's the second highest grade in terms of proficient or advanced for us, and yet our designation is well below. So we dig into the data and we learn that it's both the below basic and basic groups are making expected growth, which is good. We want to make them exceed it, but our proficient and advanced students are the ones who were not meeting the expected growth as much as they should have been. And therefore we need to target those groups and learn how we can grow them even more this year. In 5th grade, we see a similar pattern, except that it's the students who score below basic. They are exceeding growth in 5th grade, which is good news. That's a group you really want to push, right? And as I said, that's something that we want to focus on. But again, that's not to say that all students shouldn't be blue. Our goal is for all students groups to get to that blue for sure. Just to note that really students can grow. I want to just make it clear that student groups can show growth without being proficient, and they can be proficient without showing growth. They can be advanced without showing growth, as expected. Once again, I'd like to celebrate our middle school. 7th and 8th grade are exceeding expectations for growth in math. And it really is something to celebrate. And as you can see, even despite the sort of 2 well belows and the meets and the 2 well aboves, that brings us across the grades to a meets expectation overall rating for math. One more, science, and then keystones. But science, you only have 2 grades. So here you see, and this is why I think it's important to break it out by grade. So for science, you can see our 4th grade in science, 91% of our students were proficient or advanced. 62% of our students were advanced. 91 were proficient or advanced. And we are well below on our PVOS designation for 4th grade. We outperformed the state by 18 percentage points on this one. You can see it's generally much better performance than the math across the state as well. About 50% of 8th graders pass this test in the state, and about 73% of 4th graders pass the test. But now you have the opposite here. Now look at all the well above for 8th grade. So once again, at the middle school, we're seeing really high growth, and our overall will be meets. I don't know why that didn't get copied for that last piece, but our overall for science will be meets. When we look in to see like who is performing which way with these growth expectations, we see that our basic and proficient scoring groups met the growth standard for 4th grade, basic and proficient, but the advanced group didn't. There weren't any in the below basic. And then for 8th grade, we actually outperformed the state by 25 percentage points. And interestingly, this group, it is the below basic, proficient, and advanced students who are exceeding growth, and it was the basic students who were not meeting the growth expectation. So that's a little bit of a reverse of what you typically would see. All right, keystones. Similar information, the graphs look a little different because they don't produce them the same way by the state, but Christina already shared with you those proficiency scores. Algebra 1, you can see this is our overall proficiency in the first column, and then that's the test takers of the state in the second column, so you can see a comparison for that. And then you can see the delta there for us is 26 percentage points to 39 percentage points above the state. In the bottom chart there, you can see all 3 areas show growth that is well above the projection. We dig into algebra a little bit. We know that the below basic scoring group met the expectations and all other groups exceeded them. In bio, all groups exceeded expectations. And in literature, there weren't enough below basic scoring students to actually get a measure for them, but our basic scoring student group did meet expectations and our advanced and proficient group exceeded expectations. So this is typical for our high school PVOS scores. This is usually what we see, blue, blue, and blue. Every once in a while in a subject, somebody will be closer to green, but we do see lots of growth. And I'll just note that I know it may not look like it, but in comparison with the state, those are actually high numbers, and typically they're high numbers in comparison with like districts, but we'll just have to wait and see what it looks like when we get the public information. So that's a lot of information about achievement and growth and how the two compare. And just really the fact that you have to look at both. You really have to look at everything because they tell you a much different story in some cases. And now I'll turn it back over to Christina with a little bit more information about high school performance.
Thank you. So as we conclude our overview of our state assessments, before moving to our standardized assessments with Dr. Moyer, I would like to take a quick moment to look at how our current senior class is doing when we look at them taking the Keystones. So above you see the state, and then you see our high school at the bottom. And I would look at the very last column, which says our percentage of students who are proficient and above. When we think about those Keystone pathways that was just discussed in our curriculum guide, we want to look at that to make sure that our students are actually scoring proficient or advanced, to make sure that they're meeting the pathways when we look at the different options that they have. So you see, we're doing pretty well in helping our students. And the students who may not have met it, we have already started to identify some other areas that we can help them meet their pathway, but they are still going to take the Keystones again this winter. So they're not done. We still want them to keep trying, but we still also know that there are other pathways to help them become career and college ready as they move forward. Dr. Moyer will come up and talk to us about the additional assessments for ACT, AP exams, and SATs.
Yeah, and as Dr. Moyer is just taking the slides over there, I'll just note that this is part of the reason we sort of have to so carefully explain achievement scores is even just in looking at the difference between those numbers, it's a different report that tells you how did the test takers in a given year do versus how do our currently enrolled 11th graders do? Because the test takers are taking it as 9th, 10th, and 11th graders, but it doesn't count according to some reports until their 11th grade year. So their score sort of gets banked until 11th grade. So when you talk about percentages proficient and you're looking at information, it's just important to recognize you got to know which information you're looking at.
You know, and if my memory serves me well, I think we've seen this in prior years. If you look at the Algebra 1 proficient and above of 99.4%, you know, and contrast that with some of the lower numbers that we saw, you know, it's incongruous.
Right. It's hard to imagine how it makes sense. Like you sort of have to do a little math problem in your head. Like, how is it possible to have 79% pass it, but by the time they get to 11th grade, it's 99% pass it? It really does have to do with banking the scores. Right. Sometimes it seems counterintuitive.
Good evening. So this first slide shows a 5-year summary of Haverford's participation in the College Board's Advanced Placement Test. The AP exam is an end-of-course test designed to show how well students have mastered the content and skills of the specific AP course that they've taken. And Haverford High School currently offers, as we've heard earlier tonight, 30, now next year, 31, hopefully, different AP courses. As you can see from the slide, testing participation was 460 students for the school year ending in June of 2022. This was the second highest number of students to participate in the AP testing program to date and was an increase of 22 students from the previous school year. Those 460 students took a total of 833 individual tests, which tells you that some students took 2 or more tests. The national mean score for the 2022 AP exams was a 2.92, 3 being considered passing, 3, 4s, and 5s. We see by the slide that 84.12% of Haverford test results were scores of 3 or better. And again, 3 is considered a passing score.
Do you happen to have a breakdown of the number of students, I'm so sorry, with a 4 or 5?
I don't have it tonight with me, but I can certainly get that together.
Because I know a lot of schools, some do take 3s, but a lot, you need to have a 4 or 5. So I would just be
Right,
curious, just to have information.
It's a function of the competitive nature of the school, what test scores they give credit for, if any. Yeah, you're correct. This percentage was an increase over the previous year's percentage of 3 or better, and there were 387 students who scored at that level, the second highest total to date. 2021 to 22, 561 individual students enrolled in 134 courses, and 460 students took tests. That's 82% of students who took an AP course took the AP test at the end of the course in the spring. In 2022-23, the current year, we have 685 individual students enrolled in 1,219 AP courses. We won't know until the springtime what the test breakdown for those students is, but it's another increase in participation, certainly higher than pre-pandemic levels. This slide, and it's tough to read, contains some valuable information that I gleaned when researching the AP test for tonight's presentation. Some of the information has already been presented by others before I got here, but a couple things to note. The number of students nationally who have taken the AP test has been increasing over the last 10 years, and that's certainly true for us at Haverford. We did have a slight dip in the pandemic year. So we mirror what the national trends are as far as participation. It's important to note that this increase in participation has not been at the expense of passing test scores, as our percentage of scores of 3 or better has been consistently stable. The bottom of this chart shows the likelihood of passing getting a 3 or better on the 38 different courses offered by the College Board at the AP level. We offer 30 of those 38. So this information is valuable for those who are steering students during the course selection process, because it can help point students towards courses that are going to be taught at their level of both interest and aptitude. Okay. This chart is a 3-year total of our ACT scores. The ACT is a standardized test used for college admission across the U.S., and it consists of multiple choice tests in English, math, reading, and science, and there's an optional writing test as well. These tests are designed to measure skills that are most important for success in post-secondary education and that are acquired in secondary education. The score ranges tend to fall as follows. Scores of 1 to 20 are considered below average. 21 to 25 is an average score. 26 to 29 above average, and 30 to 36 is the highest score range. The 3-year trend at Haverford High School is slightly downward, with the mean scores falling to 25.2 in 2022-23 school year from 26.6 in the 2020-2021 school year. But it's important to point out that the concurrent drop in the participation rate during that time has certainly had an influence on the scoring. Only 10 students account for the 2022-23 scores. So that's a very small cohort of students indeed. Part of the fallout from the pandemic was an inability for students to come together and take college entrance tests such as the ACT. And this led many colleges and universities to go test optional during that period of time. And as a result, due to the student's inability to take the tests or due to the test discontinued usage by colleges, there's been an impact on the number of overall test takers for these standardized tests. As we look at Haverford scores, it's important to note that the ACT national scores, the mean for English was 19.5, for math 19.9, for reading the national rank was 20.9, for science 20.3, and a composite score of 20.3 as well. So Haverford scored higher in each of those categories. That's the wrong direction. Thanks, Pete. This slide details information regarding Haverford students' SAT results. SAT is another entrance exam used by most colleges and universities to make their admissions decisions. The purpose of the SAT is to measure high school students' readiness for college and provide colleges with one common data point that can be used to compare all applicants. As noted before, participation in standardized testing for the class of 2022 continues to be impacted by lingering effects of the pandemic, and as a result, the College Board cautions us about comparing performance results on recent SATs and SAT results in previous years. Nationally, 1.7 million students in the class of 2022 took the SAT at least once, which was up from 1.5 million in the class of 2021. The average SAT's total score declined slightly, as we heard earlier, from 1060 to 1050 from 2021 to 2022. This slide shows the 3-year trend in SAT scores for Haverford, who took the SAT, with the number of test takers being down for the class of 22, with 338 test takers compared to 380 test takers in the class of 2021, and 340 in the class of 2020. There's an increase in the mean score over the past 3 years, rising from 1156 in 2020 to 1174 in 2021, and again rising to 1184 in 2022. This is occurring during a time of decreasing averages nationally, which is important to note. Of note also, as far as standardized testing goes, we talked earlier tonight about the Act 158 pathways to graduation, and the state has included the standardized test scores of SAT, ACT as one component of the pathway, that if students are not meeting the pathway for Keystones, for example, and they have scores to meet the state's criteria for proficiency, they can use the SAT and ACT test. Are there any questions? All right.
We are going to excuse Dr. Moore. He has some very exciting things to celebrate in his family with some new additions. So just today, this afternoon. So thank you for coming out tonight to still present, but family is so important. See you later. All right. Hand it over to Ms. Sackler.
Great, thank you. So as you've heard us say many times, we're constantly seeking to improve student learning for every student, not any particular group of students. Yes, particular groups of students, but for each and every student. These data that we talked through this evening have led us to some specific growth areas that we now know we need to address. First, we will continue to focus on achievement for all groups. We fully expect that it will take time, but we will be back to and beyond pre-pandemic levels of achievement. We're talking about % of proficient and advanced. Next, despite some very positive fourth grade data in some ways, we will also be focusing on the growth of students for that grade, not only as the new fourth graders are in there, but also looking at those actual students who are in fifth grade now, right? So you have to look at both backward and forward. We will also be focusing on math, science, and ELA, as well as grade 5 for math growth. We always focus on individual buildings that may have relatively lower achievement. You know, in Haverford, we may have scores that are lower in one building than another building that still outperform many districts, even though they're our lowest performing. So we want to make sure that we are allocating our resources to those that have the lowest performing or the lowest growth. And so we're really like adding our supports to them and focusing those efforts. So we continue to do that. We also look at various subgroups. You heard Christina talk about who they are and how can we target those subgroups and close those gaps. We always review our plans for support. We're going to come up with that in an upcoming slide, but I just want to mention, you know, you heard a lot of curriculum talk, a lot of data and assessment talk, but our principals and our teachers spearhead this work in their buildings. You know, they were sitting in that PVOS training. Every single principal in this district sat in PVOS training to better understand these scores on Friday. They brought team members from their schools. Some brought assistant principals, some brought teachers, some brought interventionists and specialists. This is work that gets done over the summer when we have the information. We just got this PVOS information. Like, we were lucky that we had it in time for this presentation. You know, the achievement information we get a little sooner. So when we get that in the summer, we spend our time looking at what are the groups, what are the areas, and how can we focus our resources. So I don't want it to come across as that this is work that only happens at, you know, in a building that doesn't have children in it. This is really work that gets done in the buildings, and we support that work and help to guide that work. But I want to make sure that we are really clear about what we see as our growth areas as we have discussed in this presentation. Likewise, always celebrations. You never know what order to do them in. Celebrations first, I don't know. Keystone achievement and growth for all subjects remains high and remains where we want to see it in the growth. Grade 7 and 8, math and ELA and science, PVOS growth. You heard me say it over and over again. Good job for the middle school. We had lots of growth in those grades. Lots of PSSA achievement increases over 2021. So we are, you know, incrementally getting more participation. We're getting scores that are going up in many areas. Return to 2018 or even greater than 2018 achievement in grade 4 math, ELA science, grade 7 ELA and grade 8 science. Our NAEP, our national assessment, not NAEP, our national assessment participation is increasing with the exception of the ACT. We see that, you know, across the board, SAT, AP, we are still doing well. We did not see any major dips in those. And although this was not the presentation to talk about it, I don't want to conclude without noting we have elementary clubs now. We have more and additional sports and clubs at the middle school. We have work study expansion that happened. This year is the first year we've expanded that. We have financial literacy. We have course variety at our high school. We have high graduation rates. We have students who go on to college, they go on to career, they go on to the military, and they are successful. So I want to mention that, you know, even though this wasn't the report for it, just remembering that we work with humans, right? And we find ways for each human to excel. That's our goal as we go through and look at the data. So then our plan supports, just so you know, we want to continue to support the whole child. We do measure progress throughout the school year, fall, winter, spring, particularly in elementary with some of those screening universal screeners that we talked about earlier. So we give those assessments, we see how individual students are doing, and then we meet and look at those data and we determine how to respond. That happens at a building level as well as a grade level. Elementary continues to have a period of the day called MTSS, which supports additional support. It's sort of like what I need time for math and reading. We have 2 math coaches and an ELA lead teacher who are really focusing their energy on the grade levels in the buildings that need it based on these data that we shared this evening. Already ahead of the curve, last spring and over the summer, our math coaches and our ELA lead teacher updated our pacing guides, changing, you know, when are we doing which units, how are we doing it, folding in more analysis, really carving out, making sure we're hitting all of the standards, and teachers are implementing those updated pacing guides this year. We know that we are aligning and getting new science materials that will be aligned with the new standards that are coming out. As I mentioned, we're going to continue to dig into grade 4, what is happening with why it did not meet the growth that we were expecting, and identifying some building-based needs and supports. As always, not as always, for the last year, and now this is our second year, we are still allowed to use our ESSER funds to support MTSS. We have tutoring available, K-12. We were able to send many, many more students to summer school. We were able to offer a more wide variety of summer school. We have additional supports for our counselors to use. We were able to provide the MySaber screening as well as some intervention for students who need intervention as well. So those are all continued supports that we plan to use. Finally, I just grabbed a picture from our website of our National Merit Scholars. Just it's a really nice recognition that we get in the fall to see how many of our students qualify as semifinalists and finalists. So we have some of them pictured here. We appreciate, it's a lot of information to take in, and we appreciate that, and we recognize there will likely be questions, and we're happy to answer whatever we can.
And as always, just thank you for allowing us the opportunity to be able to present this information. I always like to conclude that, and especially I tell our principals this and our teachers when talking to them about data, if you can't picture a child's face when you talk about that number, you're doing the wrong thing. So our goal is to remember the children that are sitting in our seats, that parents allow us to teach each and every day. And those faces, when we see them up there, those are the kids that we work really hard for as educators. And we remember, we want to help them to succeed as much as they can. They're not products on the shelves where we're like, we could figure this out and just do this and it'll work. No, we're working and doing various things to help our diverse learners across the board. And we always like to remember that there are students and they're precious to us. So thank you to our administrators, our teachers, our families for allowing us to just be able to work with the students and the support you give them at home, as well as what our teachers and administrators are able to give them here. But our students, let's praise them for the hard work that they do and the work that they did over the pandemic to even get to where they are today, because that was not an easy task for our students. Thank you. Any questions?
It's a lot to take in, I think. It's one of those, it's a presentation that's like on the one hand and then on the other hand. And yeah, I don't envy the task that you have for all the slicing and dicing and looking and finding the areas of strengths and weaknesses, because it seems like you point to one thing as a strength and then it's like, oh, but if you look at it this way, it's right. Like, so that's hard to make a plan over. And I'm glad you brought it back to the individual child. And I guess that would be one of the questions that I have is, I know that as a parent, you get sent your child's score sometime late in the summer, or it was earlier this school year. And it sounds like there are, on the list of all of the supports. But if you got the score, you're looking at how it compares in the district or the state and have concerns, what would a parent do? Reach out to their teacher and ask?
Teacher, principal, school counselor that can get them in touch with the right people.
And parents received from the state, and they should have it by now from elementary. We got a little bit later. High school, we had a little bit earlier. But it's a pamphlet with all the information for the assessment that their students took, but also just knowing who to reach out to was assigned as well for that in the letter that they received.
And I think there's, it sounds like clearly like this is an assessment that gets a lot of attention, but in terms of a student's kind of trajectory through our schools, how much of a component is this figuring out, like at the elementary school, about a math group or reading group, or, like the prognosis that someday they'll be able to, get to the AP level of a class, as we heard about some of the high school offerings today. Like, is there
one data?
It's just one data point, right? So
I
just wanted, after having so much focus on the assessment itself, wanted to give you a chance to reiterate that, in the context of things, it's not necessarily the determining, right?
Yeah, it's not the determining factor. The teams and groups of people that Jen and Christina were mentioning tonight work at a building level to look at this and many other points that we'll hear about at a future meeting, and how some data points are used to influence instruction, some are used to influence the way MTSS is approached, with a child. There isn't any decision that is based solely on just the one
because it's measuring one moment in time.
Right. Well, yeah, thank you for presenting all of this information.
Well, thank you.
I did include on this slide just a few coming up kind of announcements that aren't really about this presentation, but I wanted to make sure they were up there so everyone could see. Annually, we administer the Psychological Sense of School Membership Survey to students in grades 4 through 12. Typically, that happens in November. We anticipate that that will happen in December this year. Just so you know, that is completely voluntary. We send home permission forms to families. We give them about 2 weeks usually to get back to us. If students don't want to participate, they don't have to. It takes only a few minutes. There's a designated time that everyone completes it. And it really just asks sort of things like, I feel like my opinion is respected here in school. I feel like I belong among my peers. And that's information that our building principals are able to use then to just create goals for helping to create a sense of belonging in their individual schools. So again, completely voluntary. Parents have the option to opt out of it. Information will be coming home. We anticipate it will likely take place for 4th through 12th graders in December. Our next Curriculum and Pupil Services Committee meeting, one of these, is January 26th. There is not one in December. And we should expect at that meeting to have a little preview of some software that we believe we're looking at to replace our current IEP, Individualized Education Plan writing systems. And there'll be a discussion of, can you believe it, the 24-25 calendar. We usually are about 2 years out with calendar planning, so that will occur at that meeting as well.
Okay, thank you. This committee meeting has gone on longer than this group, tends to convene. So I appreciate all the administrators and staff who came, and we do have some members of the public. So the final item on the agenda is an opportunity for public comment. If anybody would like to speak tonight. Please state your name and confirm your residency.
Hi, good evening, Sarah Johnson. I'm a Haverford resident. I'll make this quick. I just wanted to bring up something about PowerSchool that I noticed, and just something in general that I think the board should be aware of. I don't really have an opinion about the PowerSchool new adoption, but I have noticed a lot of education companies are being bought out by data analytics firms. And PowerSchool is an example of that. It used to be owned by Pearson, which I'm sure everybody's heard of Pearson. They're the big player. And I used to work in K-12 publishing. So I started to notice a lot of kind of like Ms. Vitale mentioned Eureka Math. That's not one of the examples, but just kind of these smaller players of online learning. They're getting bought up by these equity firms that also own data analytics firms. And why do they want that? Because these data sets are worth money. So, I mean, FERPA protects the students, like, their name, social security number, personalized information. But I think once they strip that out, they can repackage and resell those data sets. And obviously, you all don't have control over that or who owns PowerSchool. But I just think it's something to be aware of, especially when we're looking at these like outside consulting firms like Sage Wellness. And like you mentioned, that survey that goes out where students are putting really personalized information. I think looking at these privacy policies is extremely important at this point. So it's just something to be aware of. I mean, unfortunately, I know it's not something you have control over, but, and I know in Harrisburg too, they are looking at just kind of cybersecurity and protection and what they can do from the state level. And I guess lastly, I just wanted to mention too, like I saw that the English learner scores went down, and I'm wondering if we're gonna get any information specifically on the ESSER funds, because I think there was a report that had to go in the beginning of the month, I believe, on how the ESSER funds were spent. So I'm just wondering if we're going to get any more information on that, because those funds were supposed to be used to kind of support the students that were most likely to suffer learning loss during the pandemic. And obviously, I personally was concerned about the English learners with the masking, because that's obviously a barrier for those kids. So if we could get more information, because I just, unfortunately, I was hoping to see that the English learners hadn't dipped during the pandemic, especially because there was money there for them. So if we could get more specific on how that money was spent, I think that would be good. Thank you for your time.
That'll be within the MTSS when we're talking about that. That's how this district, how we have used the ESSER funds to provide staffing across the elementary buildings for MTSS.
Is there anyone else who wishes to make a comment? All right, seeing none, the business of this committee is adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Good night.